Augustinus Vox presents On Order, Book 2, written by St. Augustine, published in the Patrologia Latina by Jacques-Paul Mignet, translated and edited through prompting by Kyle Paulson, narrated by the digital voice of Kyle Paulson. After a few days had passed, Alypius arrived. The sun had risen in clear splendor, and the brightness of the sky, together with the mildness of the weather, as gentle as winter could be in that region, invited us to walk down into the meadow that we used to visit often and freely. Our mother was with us too. I had already come to know her sharp mind and heart, set on divine things, through long daily life together and careful attention. But in a serious discussion I once held with some guests on my birthday, which I later wrote down in a little book, her mind had shone out to me so powerfully that nothing seemed more naturally fitted for true philosophy. So I had decided, since she was now free from other duties, to make sure she did not miss our conversations. You have already seen this in the first book of this work. When we had sat down in that familiar place as comfortably as we could, I said to the two young men, "Even though I was annoyed with you for acting like children while talking about great matters, it still seems to me that it did not happen without an order, God being gracious, that the time in that earlier conversation where I was trying to pull you away from light-mindedness ran out in such a way that this great question would be delayed until Alypius arrived. So, since I have already explained the question to him and shown him how far we have gone in it, are you ready, Licentius, to defend the position you took based on that definition of yours? I think I remember you saying that order is that by which God does all things." "I am ready," he said, "as much as I'm able." "Then tell me," I said, "how does God do all things by order? Does he act in such a way that he himself is also under order? Or is it rather that everything else is governed by order while he stands above it?" He answered, "Where everything is good, there is no order. There you have the highest equality, which lacks nothing and does not need order." "So you deny," I said, "that everything with God is good?" "I don't deny that," he replied. "Then it follows," I said, "that neither God himself nor the realities that are with God are ruled or managed by order." He conceded this. "Now tell me," I continued, "do you think all good things are nothing? Surely not." "On the contrary," he said, "they alone truly are." "Then where does that statement of yours stand," I said, "that all things that exist are governed by order, and that there is absolutely nothing that is separated from order?" He replied, "But there are also evils, and through them it has come about that order encloses the good as well, for pure goods alone are not ruled by order, rather goods and evils together are. When we say all the things that are, we certainly don't mean only the good, so it turns out that all things together which God governs are governed by order." I answered, "Do the things that are governed and handled by God seem to you to be in motion, or do you think they are unmoving?" "These things that happen in this world," he said, "I admit, are in motion." "And the rest?" I asked. "What is with God," he replied, "does not move. Everything else, I think, does." "So," I said, "since you think the things that are with God do not move, and you grant that everything else does move, you show that all things that move are not with God." "Say that again a little more clearly," he said. He didn't seem to me to be struggling to understand so much as buying time to find an answer. "You said," I continued, "that what is with God does not move, and that everything else does move. Therefore, if the things that move would not be moved if they were with God, since you deny that anything that is with God is moved, it follows that all things that move are apart from God." He was still silent after I said this. At last he said, "It now seems to me that even here in this world, if there are things that do not move, those things are with God." "That doesn't help me," I said. "You still admit, as I take it, that not everything in this world is unmoved. From this it follows that not everything in this world is with God." "I admit," he said, "not everything." "So there is something without God," I replied. "No," he said, "there is nothing without God." "Then everything is with God," I said. Here he hesitated. "I beg you," he said, "let it not be taken as my statement that nothing can exist without God, because it really does seem to me that everything that moves is not with God." "Then, in that case," I said, This sky above us, which no one doubts is in motion, is without God. The sky is not without God, he replied. Then there is something that both is with God and is moved. I can't express clearly what I'm sensing, he said, but I ask that, without waiting for precise words, you, being as sharp as you are, try to understand, if you can, what I am struggling to say. It seems to me that nothing at all exists without God, and whatever is with God seems to me to remain unshaken. Still, I cannot say the sky is without God, not only because I think nothing exists apart from God, but also because I believe the sky has something in it that does not move, something that truly is God or is with God, even though I have no doubt that the sky itself turns and moves. Then define for us, I said, if you're willing, what it means to be with God and what it means not to be without God. If our dispute is really about words, we can easily ignore that, as long as we can see the thing itself that you are grasping in your mind. I hate defining, he said. What shall we do then? I asked. You define, please, he said. It's much easier for me to see what I don't approve in another's definition than to explain anything well by giving a definition myself. I'll please you, I said. Does it seem to you that being with God means being ruled and governed by Him? No, he said. That's not how I had imagined it when I said that the things which do not move are with God. Well then, I replied, see whether you at least like this definition. Whatever understands God is with God. I grant that, he said. Well then, I continued, do you think a wise person understands God? I do, he said. So wise people are with God, I said. Yet wise people not only live in one house or one city. They travel over vast regions, they sail, they move about. How then can it be true that whatever is with God is not moved? You've made me laugh, he said, as if I had meant that whatever the wise person does, that thing is with God. The wise person is with God, but what is with God is the thing he knows. Doesn't the wise person know his book, his cloak, his tunic, his furniture if he has any, and other such things that even fools know quite well? I asked. I admit, he said, that knowing one's tunic and cloak is not being with God. So here's what you're saying, I answered. Not everything the wise person knows is with God, but whatever in the wise person is with God, the wise person knows that. Exactly, he said. For whatever the wise person knows by these bodily senses is not with God. Only what he perceives by the mind is. I'll even dare to say more, but I'll still say it, because I'd rather be confirmed or corrected by you as judge. Whoever knows only what the bodily senses can reach does not seem to me merely not to be with God. He doesn't even seem to be with himself. At this point I noticed Trigetius's face. He clearly wanted to say something, but was holding back out of modesty, as if he were intruding into another's place. So, when Licentius had fallen silent, I gave Trigetius permission to speak if he wished. He said, To me, no one at all seems to know those things that belong to bodily senses, for sensing and knowing are not the same. If we know anything at all, I think it is held only by the intellect and can be grasped only by the intellect. From this it follows that if being with God is that which the wise person understands, then everything the wise person truly understands can be with God. Licentius agreed. Then Trigetius added a point I could not ignore. The wise person is entirely with God, he said, for the wise person even understands himself. This follows from what I received from you, that what is with God is what understands God, and from what we ourselves said, that whatever is understood by the wise person is with God. But the part of the wise person by which he uses bodily senses, I don't think we should count that part when we call someone wise. I admit I don't know what that part really is, nor can I clearly imagine its nature at all. You deny, then, I said, that the wise person consists not only of body and soul, but even of the whole soul, since it would be madness to deny that the part which uses the senses belongs to the soul. It isn't the eyes themselves or the ears that sense, but something else, some inner power that perceives through the eyes. And if we do not assign this act of sensing to the intellect, we must assign it to some other part of the soul. If we refuse both, the only thing left is to give sensing to the body, which to me is about as absurd as anything one could say. The wise person's soul he said, cleansed by the virtues and now joined to God, is worthy of being called the wise person, and nothing else deserves that name. But there are, if I may say so, certain scraps and cast off remnants which that soul has washed off and drawn back inward. These serve that soul. Or if you insist on calling this whole thing soul, still these lower parts serve and are subject to that one part of the soul which alone deserves to be called wise. I think memory too lives in that lower subject part. So the wise person uses this part like a servant. He gives it commands. He sets limits on it by the rules of law, so that when he uses bodily senses for those things that are necessary not to him as wise, but simply as a human being, that lower part does not dare to exalt itself, or grow proud over its master, or use the things that truly belong to the master in a wild and excessive way. To that lowest part belong those things that pass away. And what needs memory more than passing, fleeing things? The wise person, on the other hand, embraces God and enjoys him, a God who always remains, who is not awaited as if he were not yet, nor feared as if he might cease to be, but who, simply by truly being, is always present. This wise person, remaining fixed and unmoved in himself, still cares for, as though it were his servant's little property, that lower part, so that he may use it well like a frugal and diligent steward, and guard it sparingly. As I considered his view with admiration, I remembered that I had once briefly said something similar in his hearing. Smiling, I said, "Licentius, thank this servant of yours. If he had not now served you with something from his own store, you might not have had anything ready to say. For if memory belongs to that part which, as you said, presents itself as a servant to the good mind to be ruled by it, you've just been helped by that servant, believe me, to say what you did. So, before I return to the main question of order, doesn't it seem to you that, at least for the sake of such things, honest and necessary disciplines, the wise person needs memory?" "Why would he need memory," he replied, "if he holds and possesses all his things right before him? We don't summon memory to help us in simple sensation when something is right before our eyes. So why would the wise person, who has all things before the inner eyes of the intellect, who gazes fixedly and immovably on God himself, with whom are all the things the intellect sees and possesses, why would he need memory? As for me," he added, "I still need memory in order to retain what I heard from you. I am not yet master of that servant. I sometimes obey him, then fight not to obey, and I dare to claim my freedom against him. And if I occasionally give an order, and he obeys so that he makes me think I've won, in other things he rises up again so strongly that I lie under his feet, miserable as I am. So when we're talking about the wise person, please don't mean me." "Nor me either," I said. "But still, could such a wise person ever desert his own people or drop his duties, while he still lives in this body, where he holds that servant under his law, will he ever stop giving help where he can, especially that help which people beg from him most intensely, the teaching of wisdom itself? When he does this, in order to teach properly and not clumsily, he often prepares something in advance that he intends to speak or explain in an ordered way. Unless he commits this to memory, it will inevitably be lost. So either you must deny that works of kindness belong to the wise, or you must admit that some of the wise person's things are indeed kept in memory. Or perhaps," I continued, "you'll say that the wise person entrusts some of his things, not for his own sake, but for the sake of his people, to that servant, so that the servant, trained and sobered by his master's excellent discipline, may keep only what is needed to bring fools to wisdom, since the master has ordered him to guard those things." "I don't think," he said, "that the wise person entrusts anything at all to that servant, for the wise person is always fixed in God, whether he is silent or speaking with people. It's the servant, already well trained, who carefully keeps certain things so that, while the master is teaching, he can suggest them at times, doing him a grateful service as to a most just Lord, under whose power he knows himself to live. And he does this not by reasoning things out, but under that highest law and supreme order." "I'll not oppose your reasoning now," I said. "Let's rather press on with what we set out to do. The question of that servant and how he really behaves is no small matter and cannot be settled in a short talk. We will look at it another time when God himself provides the opportunity in due order." We had already agreed what it means to be with God. When I said that whatever understands God is with God, you even added more and said that those things are also with God which are understood by the wise. That is what now troubles me so much. How have you suddenly placed stupidity itself with God? For if everything that the wise man understands is with God, and if he cannot escape stupidity except by understanding it, then that plague, what an awful thing to say, will also be with God. They were shaken by this conclusion and stayed silent for a while. Then Trigetius said, "Let the one answer whose arrival for this discussion we were all so happy about, I mean Alypius, let him speak." Alypius replied, "God forbid, so this is what my long silence was preparing for, but my quiet has been broken now. I'll do what I can to answer this challenge, once I've taken thought for myself and secured one promise from you, that after this answer you won't demand anything further from me on this topic." "No, Alypius," I said, "it doesn't suit your kindness and goodwill to deny your voice to our conversation, especially when we've been longing to hear it. Go ahead and say what you've begun. The rest will unfold as that order we've been talking about allows." "From that order," he said, "for whose defense you've temporarily drafted me, I must hope for better things later. But if I'm not mistaken, you thought stupidity had been tied to God only because they said that all the things understood by the wise are with God. How far that statement is meant to go, I'll leave aside for now. Instead, I'll look at your line of reasoning. You said, if all the things understood by the wise are with God, and if the wise man can only escape stupidity by understanding stupidity, then stupidity itself, which is horrible to say, will also be with God. It's as if you didn't see that a person should not be counted among the wise before he has escaped stupidity and learned to avoid it. And we said that what is understood by the wise is with God. So when someone understands stupidity in order to escape it, he is not yet wise. Once he has become wise, stupidity is no longer among the things he understands. And since we join to God those things that are understood by the wise, stupidity is rightly separated from God. "You've answered sharply, as usual, Alypius," I said, "but as though you'd been pushed into a corner not of your own making. Still, since you are, I think, willing to be counted a fool along with me for the moment, what shall we do if we find a wise man who is willing, by teaching and discussion, to free us from so great an evil as stupidity? Surely I'll ask nothing else of him first, nothing before this, that he show me what stupidity is, what it's like, and what harm it brings to the mind, for I really can't easily say that of you, but it keeps hold of me as long and as deeply as I fail to understand it. So the wise man, prompted by you, will say, 'To learn this, you should have come to me when I was still foolish. Now you will have to be your own teachers, for I no longer understand stupidity.' If I heard this from him, I wouldn't hesitate to warn the man to come along with us as a companion. We would then go looking for another teacher together, for while I admit I don't fully understand stupidity, I can at least see that nothing could be more foolish than such an answer. Still, perhaps shame will keep him from abandoning us like that, or from following us in that way. So he will argue instead and describe in great detail the evils of stupidity. And we, trying to take good care of ourselves, will either listen carefully to a man who doesn't know what he's talking about, or will believe that he knows what he doesn't understand, or else, by your own reasoning, we will have stupidity joined to God again through his teaching. I see no way to defend any of these, so the last option remains, the one you really don't like." "I never thought you envious," he said. "If these people whose case I took up had given me any fee, as advocates sometimes receive, I'd now be forced, because of your grip on this argument, to pay it back to them. Let them be satisfied with this much, that while you were pressing me I gave them more time to think. Or, if defeated clients are ready to listen to their lawyer, they must now concede this point to you and be more cautious in other matters." "I won't despise," I said, "what Trigetius wanted to say in your defense, even though he spoke up a bit noisily at first. And with your kind permission, I'll take up his idea. Perhaps you're not fully prepared, since you've only recently joined this discussion, and I had already decided to listen patiently to these young men as they argue their own case, as I began to do." Then Trigetius, with Licentius still completely away in his thoughts, said, "Take this however you like, laugh at it if you wish. But here is how it seems to me we should not call the act by which someone understands stupidity a true understanding. For stupidity is itself the very cause, or at least the greatest cause, of not understanding. So the thing by which stupidity is grasped or noticed isn't true insight, but rather a kind of sensing of our own darkness. I'm not quick to reject that, I said, even though what Alypius feels still has great weight with me, namely how someone could properly teach about something he does not understand, and how he could show how destructive to the mind something is which he himself does not see. For thinking of such things, he was afraid to say what you just said, even though he knows well that famous line from learned authors: "One must understand the disease to cure it." Still, if I shift my gaze and simply consider bodily sight, since the soul uses that too, and every comparison between intellect and body is only possible when the intellect is there, I am drawn to say that no one can see darkness. If understanding with the mind is like seeing with the eyes, and if no one, with eyes open and healthy and clear, can actually see darkness, then it's not absurd to say that stupidity cannot be understood, for we often call stupidity the darkness of the mind. And then that old question, how can someone avoid stupidity if he does not understand it, will no longer trouble us. Just as with our eyes, we avoid darkness simply by not wanting not to see, so too, anyone who wants to avoid stupidity should not try to understand stupidity itself. Instead, he should grieve that he cannot understand the things that can be understood and noticed, not by understanding stupidity itself, but by feeling his failure to understand other things that stupidity is present in him. Let's go back to order now, I said, so that we can finally get Licentius back from his absence. Let me ask you both this. Do you think that everything the foolish person does is done by order? Consider carefully, I added, what traps this question lays. If you say, yes, by order, then where will that definition of yours be? Order is that by which God does all things. For then it will be true that even foolish acts are done by order. But if you say that there is no order in the things done by the fool, then there will be something not held by order. And you don't want either side of that. Be careful, I beg you, not to ruin the whole of order itself in trying to defend it. Tragedius answered first. Licentius was still far off, lost in some other concern. It's easy, he said, to answer your trap, at least in general, but right now I lack the image that would best illustrate what I mean. Still, I'll say what I think, and you can do what you did a little earlier. That explanation you gave about darkness brought great light to what I had expressed in a tangled way. He continued, the whole life of fools, though it's not coherent or ordered in itself when seen from their point of view, is still enclosed within the necessary order of things by divine providence. That life is held and fixed in certain places, as it were, by that ineffable and eternal law, and cannot exist where it ought not to be. So when someone of narrow soul looks only at the foolish life itself, he turns away in disgust from its great ugliness and chaos. But if he lifts up the eyes of his mind and lets them range widely so that he takes in everything together at once, he will find nothing that is not ordered and assigned its own place and rank. How great and astonishing, I said, is this hidden order of things which God himself is somehow answering through you. You're saying things that could not be spoken without being seen, and could not be seen in such a way without being true and deep. You wanted one example to illustrate your idea. 1,000 come to my mind and pull me strongly toward agreement. What is more hideous than an executioner? What's more savage and cruel in mind? Yet he holds a necessary place in the laws and is fitted into the order of a well-governed commonwealth. In his own mind he's evil. In the higher order he is the punishment of evildoers. What's more sordid and empty of honor, more filled with disgrace than prostitutes, pimps, and the other pests of that sort? Remove prostitutes from human affairs, and you will unsettle everything with lust. Put them in the place of honorable wives, and you will stain and disgrace society. So this kind of people is, by its own life, utterly foul, and by its position in the order of things most lowly. Yet they too have their assigned place. Isn't it the same with certain members of a living body? If you look at them alone, you can hardly bear to look, yet nature's order did not want such parts to be missing, because they are necessary, nor allowed them to stand out, because they are indecent, they are ugly, but by holding their place, they give up the better place to the nobler parts. Wasn't that cockfight we mentioned in the previous book a delightful spectacle for our villa and our fields? And yet how wretchedly ugly and base those bodies were that were fighting. Still, from that very contest came a more complete beauty of the whole scene. I think everything is like this, I said, but such things require eyes to see. In language, for instance, the mistakes called solecisms and barbarisms, poets have loved them. Instead of fleeing them as obvious faults, they preferred to rename them with terms like schemes and metaplasms. Yet if you take them away from poetry, we will miss some of its sweetest seasonings. Heap many of them in one place, and the whole thing becomes harsh, stale, rancid, and disgusting. But sprinkle them sparingly and appropriately, and they delight us. Take that same mixture of language and put it into ordinary public speech, into a court, say, instead of a stage. Who wouldn't tell the speaker to stop and leave and run off to the theater instead? Order, then, this very order we're talking about, rules and moderates such things so that they are neither too much where they belong nor out of place where they don't. In a well-ordered speech, sections that are lowly and rough, almost shabby, insert themselves between high and polished parts and make the lovely places stand out. If you have only these low parts, you throw the speech away as worthless. But if you lack them altogether, the noble parts cannot rise, cannot sit in their own territories and dominions, cannot shine with their own light. Instead, they block one another and confuse the whole. Here, too, I continued, order deserves our thanks. False conclusions that creep in gradually, by small subtractions or additions, and draw us into assent to a lie. Who doesn't fear them? Who doesn't hate them? And yet these same tricks of reasoning, when carefully placed in their right spot in a debate, can become so effective that somehow they make the very act of being deceived sweet. Should we not praise order here as well, that arranges even this so artfully? And in music, in geometry, in the motions of the stars, in the iron laws of numbers, order holds such rule that if someone wants to see, as it were, the very fountain and inner shrine of order, he must either find it in such things or be led through them without error to that place. This sort of training, if one uses it moderately, for the only danger here is too much, nourishes a soldier of philosophy, indeed even a captain, so that he can fly where he wills and arrive at that highest measure beyond which he neither can, nor should, nor wants to seek anything further. Such a person, though still entangled in human affairs, nevertheless looks down on them all and judges them. He will not be disturbed by questions like why one man longs for children and never gets them, while another is tortured by the too great fertility of his wife, why a man ready to give generously has no money while a thin scabby money-lender lies on buried coins, why vast estates are scattered and wasted by luxury, why a beggar who has been weeping all day barely gets a single coin, why honor raises up someone unworthy while shining character lies hidden in the crowd. These and other things in human life often drive people to believe, impiously, that our lives are governed by no divine order at all. Others, however, pious men, good men, and gifted with bright intelligence, who cannot bring themselves to believe that the supreme God abandons us, and yet are troubled by this darkness and confusion of events because they see no order, these people, wanting the hidden causes to be laid bare, often pour out their own errors in song. If such people asked only this one question, why Italy always begs for calm winters, while our own poor Getulia is always thirsty, who could easily reply to them? Where, in that case in our land, could any clue to that order be tracked down? For my part, if I can give counsel to my own people, as far as I can see and feel, I think they should be trained in all disciplines. For in no other way can these things be understood clearly as bright as day, but if they are too lazy, or taken up with other duties, or already too hardened to learn, they should prepare the support of faith. With that bond, the one who allows no one to perish who has trusted him rightly in his mysteries can draw them to himself and free them from those dreadful entangled evils. There are two paths we follow when the obscurity of things troubles us, either reason or authority. Philosophy promises reason and liberates very few, yet it compels even those few not to despise the mysteries, but to understand them alone as they should be understood. True and genuine philosophy has no other business than this: to teach what is the source of all things that has no source itself, how great a mind remains in that source, and what has flowed from it into our salvation without any loss or change, this one source, this one omnipotent God, who is also tri-powerful, Father and Son and Holy Spirit, is proclaimed by those venerable mysteries which, by sincere and unshaken faith, set peoples free, not confusedly, as some do, not insultingly, as many do. And how great is this, that the very God of such greatness for our sakes took on and acted in a body like ours. The lower and more common the body he chose for our sake appears, the more clearly his mercy shines, and the farther away his goodness stands from the proud cleverness of some minds. As for the soul, where it comes from, what it is doing here, how far it is from God, what it has that can go either way, toward the higher or the lower nature, how far it can die, and how it is shown to be immortal, how great and sure an order must be in place for such things to be learned. That order is very great and very certain. I will speak about it briefly later, if there is time. For now, accept this from me. If anyone rushes into these matters, into their knowledge, carelessly, and without the ordered training of the disciplines, he becomes, not a student, but merely curious, not learned, but gullible, not cautious, but unbelieving. So when you just now answered my question so well and so fittingly, I both marvel where it came from and am compelled to acknowledge it. Let us see how far your hidden attention can carry you. Now, let us bring back licentious words as well. He has been so long occupied with some other concern that, in relation to this discussion, I think he will be reading this like one of our absent friends. So come back to us, please, Licentius. Be fully present here. I'm speaking now to you, for you approved my definition of what it means to be with God, and you tried, as far as I can follow, to show me how the mind of the wise person stays unmoved with God. What troubles me now, I continued, is this: how, as long as this wise person lives among human beings, can we say he is in the body? And if we admit that, how can we say that his mind stands still when his body wanders here and there? By the same logic, you could say that when a ship moves, the people in it are standing still, even though they own and steer the ship. Even if they guided the ship by thought alone and made it go where they wished, still, when the ship moved, they too would necessarily move with it. The soul is not in the body in such a way, said Licentius, that the body commands the soul. That's not what I'm saying, I replied. The rider is not on the horse in such a way that the horse commands the rider. But even though the rider directs the horse to go where he wishes, he still must move when the horse moves. The rider can sit upright without moving, he said. You're forcing us, I said, to define what it means to move. If you can, I'd like you to do so. No, he said. Let me keep the benefit you granted before. I still insist that I won't define anything until I freely declare myself ready. Just then a boy ran out from the house where we had given him this task. He told us that it was time to eat. So this boy, I said, does not define for us what it is to move, but he forces us to show it with our eyes. Let's go then, and pass from this place to another place, for if I'm not mistaken, that is nothing else than to move. They smiled, and we got up and left. After we had refreshed our bodies, the sky was overcast with clouds, so we sat in our usual place in the bath. I said to Licentius, Do you grant, then, that motion is nothing other than passing from one place to another? I grant it, he said. And do you grant, I continued, that no one can be in a place where he wasn't before, unless he has been in motion? I don't understand, he said. If something was in one place a while ago, I said, and now is in another, do you admit that it has moved? He agreed. So, I asked, could the living body of some wise man be here with us now, while his mind was absent from here? It could, he said. Even, I asked, if he were talking with us and teaching us something. Even if he were teaching us wisdom itself, he replied, I would still say he was with himself, not with us. So not in the body? I asked. No, he said. But in that case, I replied, would you not admit the body was dead if it had no soul? Yet I proposed a living body. I don't know how to explain this, he said. I see that a human body can't be alive without the soul in it, and yet I can't say that wherever the body of a wise man is, his mind is not with God. I'll help you explain it, I said. Perhaps you think that because God is everywhere, a wise person can find God wherever he goes and be with him there. That way we can say that the wise man moves from place to place, which is to move, and still is always with God. I admit, he said, that the body passes from place to place, but I deny this of the mind, which is what truly deserves the name wise. For now, I replied, I'll yield to you, so that we don't block our present purpose with a topic that is obscure and demands more time and effort. Let's look instead at this. Since we've already defined what it is to be with God, can we also know what it is to be without God, even though I think that's already clear? For I suppose it seems to you that those who are not with God are without God. If I had the words, he said, I might say something you wouldn't dislike. But I beg you to bear with my childishness, and to run ahead with your own quick mind, as is fitting for you, and seize the things themselves. For to me, these people neither seem to be with God, nor do I think they are without God. God still has them. I can't say they are without God if God has them, but I also don't say they are with God, because they themselves do not have God. For we already agreed in that birthday conversation of yours that to have God is nothing other than to enjoy God. I confess I'm afraid of saying something contradictory, that someone could neither be with God nor without God. Don't let that disturb you, I said. When the reality is agreed upon, who cares about the words? Let's go back, then, to that definition of order. You said that order is that by which God does all things. And as I see it, you believe that God does everything. That's why you thought nothing could lie outside order. But now we must ask what we have not yet examined closely. Does God also do those things that we freely admit are done badly? Does his order produce even those? You have indeed, I said, seen where I was going, but just as you saw what I was about to ask, so I beg you to see what needs to be answered. He shrugged his shoulders and said, I'm confused. Not long after that, my mother joined us. After a short silence, he asked that I pose the question again. He hadn't quite noticed that Trigetius had already answered it earlier. What? I said. Why should I repeat it? Don't do over what's already been done, as they say. I'd rather advise you to make sure you read carefully what was said before if you didn't hear it. I wasn't offended at your absence from our talk, and I put up with it for some time, neither blocking what you were doing with your mind, away from us and for your own good, nor giving up the thoughts this pen of mine was capturing so you wouldn't lose them. Now, I said, let me ask the thing we haven't yet examined with careful reasoning. When this question about order first sprang up, not by chance, but by some hidden order, I remember you saying that order is the justice of God that separates the good from the wicked and gives each what is his due. I don't think there is any clearer definition of justice than that. So please answer this. Do you think there was ever a time when God was not just? Never, he said. If God has always been just, I said, then good and evil must always have existed. Absolutely, my mother answered. I can't see any other conclusion. If there was ever any judgment of God when evil did not yet exist, or if at some time he was not giving each his own, both the good and the bad, then he could not be called just. Licentius said, So, mother, you think we must say that evil has always existed? I don't dare say that, she replied. What shall we say then? I asked. If God is just because he judges between the good and the evil, then when evil was not yet, he was not just. They stayed quiet, and I noticed that Trigetius wanted to answer, so I invited him. He said, God was surely just. He could separate good and evil if they existed, and simply by being able to do that, he was just. When we say that Cicero prudently uncovered Catiline's conspiracy, that he was not corrupted by any bribe to spare the guilty, that he justly punished them with the highest penalty by the Senate's authority, and that he bravely endured all the attacks of his enemies and what he himself called a mountain of hatred, we do not mean that these virtues would not have existed in Cicero if Catiline had never plotted harm to the state. Virtue must be considered in itself, not through some outward work like that, even in a human being. How much more, then, in God? Even now we can see that God has always been just, in that as soon as evil entered, he wasted no time in giving each his due. He didn't have to learn justice, he only had to use what he had always possessed. When Licentius and my mother both approved this answer, I said, "What do you say now, Licentius? Where is that strong claim of yours, that nothing can happen outside order? For what brought evil into being was not brought about by God's order. His order only enclosed it once it existed. And now you see that either some things can happen outside of order, or else God's order introduced evil itself, and made him the author of evil. I can think of no blasphemy more horrible than that." As I turned this over and over in front of him, whether he understood or pretended not to, he had nothing to say and fell silent. Then my mother said, "I don't think we should say that nothing at all can happen outside the order of God. I think that evil itself, which came to be, was in no way born from God's order, but that justice of his did not allow it to remain unordered. Justice forced evil back into an order fitting to it." Seeing how earnestly they all were seeking God, each according to his strength, and yet not seeing the very order by which one arrives at the understanding of that ineffable majesty, I said, "I beg you, if you really love order as much as you seem to, don't let us be disorderly and upside down. Although the most hidden reasoning promises to show us that nothing takes place outside divine order, consider this. If we heard a school teacher trying to teach a child syllables when no one had first taught the child his letters, we would not only think him ridiculous as a fool, but we might think him insane and in need of restraint. And we would think so for this one reason: he's ignorant of the order of teaching. Many things like this are done by people who are unskilled in the arts and are mocked for it by the skilled. And many things are done by madmen that even fools can see are wrong. And yet this high, deep discipline we've mentioned promises to show, to those who are serious and love God and souls as they should, that even these perverse things do not fall outside divine order, more clearly, in fact, than we can count numbers. This discipline is the very law of God, fixed and unshaken in him and copied, as it were, into wise souls. The more they contemplate it by understanding, and the more diligently they keep it by living, the better and higher they know themselves to live. This discipline orders those who want to know it to follow a double order, one of life, the other of learning. So, for young people who wish to study it, the rules of life are these. They must hold themselves back from sexual indulgence, from the enticements of food and drink, from excessive care of the body, adornment, and fashion, from empty games and amusements, from laziness, oversleeping, and sluggishness, from rivalry, backbiting, and envy, from ambition for honors and positions of power, even from excessive love of praise itself. They must believe that love of money is the most certain poison for their whole hope. They must do nothing weakly, nothing recklessly. As for the faults of those under their care, let them either tame anger completely or so restrain it that it hardly differs from having no anger. Let them hate no one. Let them be willing to cure every vice they see. When they punish their own, let them be careful not to punish too harshly. When they pardon, not to pardon too lightly. Let them think of all those under their authority as their own people. Let them serve others in such a way that they would be ashamed to lord it over them. Let them rule in such a way that serving them would be a joy. For the sins of others, let them not be troublesome unless asked. Let them avoid getting into enmities as carefully as they can. If they can't avoid them, let them bear them patiently, and let them end them as quickly as possible. In all their dealings and interactions with other people, it is enough to follow this common proverb: do not do to others what you do not want to suffer yourself. They should not want to manage public affairs unless they are already perfected. They should strive to reach perfection either by the age when a man is eligible for the Senate, or at least by the end of youth. If someone turns to this life late, he should not think that nothing is being asked of him. In fact, he will keep these rules more easily once age has cooled his passions. Through all of life, in every place and time, they should either have friends or be seeking to gain them. They should do favors to worthy men even before being asked. Let them care less about the proud than the proud care about themselves, and let them not be proud at all. Let them live fittingly and harmoniously. Let them worship God, think of him, seek him, and lean on him by faith, hope, and love. Let them desire calm and steady progress for their own studies and for all their companions. And let each one, as far as he can, secure for himself and his friends a good and peaceful mind. Now, I must say how those who live in this way should be educated. We are also led to learning in two ways, by authority and by reason. In time, authority comes first. In reality, reason is higher. One thing has priority in acting, another in value. So, although the authority of good people seems more helpful to the unskilled crowd, and reason better suited to the educated, yet since no one goes from unskilled to skilled without first being unskilled, and no unskilled person knows how to make himself teachable or what sort of life makes him fit to be taught, it happens that for everyone who wants to learn great and hidden truths, authority is the only door that opens the way. Whoever enters that door follows without doubt the rules of the best life. By following them, he becomes teachable. Then, at last, he learns with what inner reason those very rules he had been following are endowed, and then he begins to learn what reason itself is, which he now follows and grasps after being nursed in the cradle of authority, and what the intellect is in which all things are present, or rather, which is itself all things, and what the source is that is beyond all things. In this life, very few reach that knowledge. Beyond this life, no one goes further. Those who are content with authority alone and give steady effort to good morals and right prayers, even if they either despise or cannot master the liberal and noble disciplines, such people I don't quite know how to call blessed while they still live among humans. But I firmly believe that once they leave this body, they are freed more easily or more slowly according to how well or badly they lived. Authority is partly divine, partly human. True, firm, highest authority is what we call divine. In this area, we must fear the amazing deceit of airy spirits. Through certain acts of divination relating to the things perceived by the bodily senses, and through certain displays of power, they easily deceive souls, souls that are curious about dying fortunes, greedy for fragile powers, or scared of cheap miracles. Divine authority, then, should be that which not only surpasses all human power in signs that meet the senses, but also deals with the human being himself, showing him how far God has bent down for his sake, and then teaching him that he should not cling to the senses by which these wonders are seen, but should fly to the intellect. At the same time, this authority must show both how great God is here, why he does such things, and how little he values them. For he must teach by his deeds the greatness of his power, by his lowliness the fullness of his mercy, and by his commands his very nature. All this is delivered more securely and deeply in the sacred mysteries into which we are initiated, where the life of the good is most easily purified, not by complicated arguments, but by the authority of mysteries. Human authority often deceives, yet among human beings those deserve special respect who, as far as the minds of the unskilled can see, give many proofs of their learning, and do not live differently from what they teach. And if some of fortune's gifts are added to them, gifts whose use shows them to be great, and whose disregard shows them to be greater, then it's very hard indeed to blame those who trust such people when they give rules for living. Here, Alypius said, "You've set before our eyes a very great picture of life, both in full detail and in brief. We already hunger for this life each day because of your constant instruction, but you've inflamed us even more today. If it were possible, I'd wish not only us, but everyone to reach this life at once and cling to it, so that what is wonderful in hearing might be just as easy in imitating. But somehow, and may this be far from us, the human mind shouts when it hears these things that they are heavenly, divine, and absolutely true. Yet in its desires it behaves otherwise. I truly think it's only either divine men or men aided by God who can live this way." "You know well," I answered, "that these rules of life, which you, as always, like so much, are not my invention, even if I've expressed them in my own words for the moment. The books of great and almost divine men are full of them. I say this not for you, but for these young men, so they won't think they must hang on my authority. I don't want them to believe in me at all, except when I'm teaching and giving reasons, for whose sake I think you added your words. For you, Alypius, these things are not hard to follow. You've seized them with such eagerness and entered into them with such a marvelous natural thrust that I have become your teacher in words, and you mine in the reality behind them. I have no reason at all to lie, or even any opportunity to do so. I don't think you'd become more eager by false praise. And those who are here know both of us, and this conversation will be sent to someone who knows both of us intimately. As for good men, and those dedicated to the best morals, I added, I don't think they are as rare as you imagine. Many are completely hidden from you. From many others you see only what is on the surface. Their most admirable qualities are hidden, since such things live in the soul, which our senses can't see. And often, in trying to match the talk of vicious people, they say things that seem to approve or desire what those people praise. They also do many things unwillingly, to avoid hatred or to escape ridicule. When we hear and see these actions, we judge in the only way our senses report, and so we misunderstand them. That's why we end up judging many people wrongly. We think they aren't what those people know themselves to be, and what their close friends know them to be. You should be persuaded of this by the great inner gifts of certain of our friends, gifts that only we know about. This mistaken view is also fed by the fact that some people suddenly turn to a good and admirable life, and until they become known by more visible deeds, they are assumed to be the same as before. To take a nearer example, who would readily believe that these young men, if they had known them earlier, are now so eager to seek great things, and have suddenly, at this age, declared such strong war on pleasures? Let's drive this opinion out of our minds. That divine help you mentioned, rightly and religiously, at the end of your speech is working much more widely than many think. Its mercy is at work among all peoples. But let's return to our main line of discussion. We've said enough about authority. Let us now see what reason itself wants to say. Reason is the movement of the mind by which it distinguishes and connects what is to be learned. Guided by this, a very rare kind of person can use reason to understand God, or even to understand the soul itself, whether in us or everywhere. The reason is that once the mind goes out into the business of the senses, it's hard for it to return to itself. So, while people try to direct everything by reason in the things of this deceptive world, very few are aware what reason itself is or what it is like. It's a strange thing, but it's true. I won't now try to show you fully what reason is, as it should be understood. If I tried, I would be both silly and arrogant, claiming to have grasped it myself. But let's track it down as far as our talk requires in the things that are familiar to us. First, let's see where the word reason is commonly used. And this should matter a lot to us, because the old wise men have defined the human being this way. Man is a mortal, rational animal. In that definition, they give first the general class, animal, and then add two differences. I think the purpose was to remind the human being both where he must return and what he must flee. Just as the soul has lapsed down to what is mortal, so its return must be back to reason. In one word, rational, he is separated from beasts. In the other word, mortal, he is separated from the divine. If he doesn't hold on to reason, he will be a beast. If he doesn't turn away from mortality, he will not be divine. The learned often make a fine distinction between what is rational and what is made with reason. They say that rational is what uses reason or could use it. Made with reason is something produced or spoken according to reason. So we can call these baths in our conversation things made with reason, but we call rational either the one who built these baths or we who are speaking. Reason therefore goes out from the rational soul into the things it makes or follows that are in accord with reason. I see two areas where the power of reason can be brought near even to the senses, in human works that we see and in words that we hear. In both cases, the mind uses two messengers because of the body's needs, the eyes and the ears. So, when we see something made with well-fitting parts and a good shape, we readily say it appears rationally formed. Likewise, when we hear something well harmonized, we don't hesitate to say that it sounds reasonable or well ordered. But we would be laughed at if we said it smells reasonably, or has a reasonable taste, or feels reasonably soft, unless we're talking about things produced by humans for a purpose. For example, if someone praises the smell of a place that has been prepared with strong odors to drive away snakes, and calls that smell reasonable because of its purpose, or if someone calls a cup reasonably bitter because a doctor has prepared the medicine for a sick person, or if someone says a bath, heated to the doctor's prescription, is reasonably hot. In all these cases, we are looking to the reason behind the action. But if someone walks into a garden and smells a rose, he doesn't say, "How reasonably it smells." not even if the doctor told him to smell it. In that case, we would say the doctor gave the order reasonably, but we wouldn't call the smell itself reasonable. And that's not just because the smell is natural. A chef can season a dish in a reasonable way, but we don't call the taste itself reasonable. We only say it's reasonably seasoned if the seasoning has a purpose beyond simple pleasure. If we ask someone who's been given medicine why it should taste sweet, he gives some further reason, his illness, that is not in the sense itself, but exists elsewhere in the body. But if some glutton is asked why something should taste sweet, and he says, because I like it or because it pleases me, no one would say that taste is reasonable, unless maybe that pleasure is necessary for some other good, and the thing was prepared for that purpose. So we found some footprints of reason in the senses, and especially in sight and hearing, even in the pleasures of these senses. The other senses only borrow the name reasonable when a rational animal has prepared something for a rational goal. But in sight, where we call the fitting of parts rational, we usually call the result beauty. In hearing, where we say there is a reasonable arrangement of sound and a well-ordered song, we call it sweetness in a more proper sense. We do not, however, call something reasonable simply because its color pleases us or because a string sounds clear. It seems then that in our enjoyment of sight and sound, reason plays a role where there is measure and proportion. In this very building, by looking carefully, we can't help being bothered that one door is on the side and the other near the middle, and yet not exactly in the middle. In things built by human craft, lack of proportion in the parts, when there is no need for it, seems to do a kind of injustice to our sight. On the other hand, inside, the three windows that pour light onto the bath, one in the center and two on either side, at equal distances, bring a delight to us when we look carefully. They draw the soul to themselves, that is plain without many words. Because of this, architects now use their own word reason for what they do. They say that parts that don't fit together well lack reason. This notion stretches widely and is found in almost all human arts and works. In poetry, where we also say there is a reason in what pleases our ears, who doesn't see that all this pleasure comes from measurement? Our very language has taken the word rhythm to mean this, and what actors dance doesn't show the same thing. When a skilled performer's movements rightly express the meaning of a song, we call his dance reasonable, not so much because of the pleasing movement of his limbs, but because he signifies something well. If he were to mime a winged Venus or a fully clothed Cupid, and did so with amazing skill and beautiful movement, he wouldn't offend our eyes. But he would address through the eyes the mind alone, in which the meaning of the act is grasped. The eyes themselves would be offended only if the movement were clumsy, for that movement belongs to the sense of sight, and the pleasure we feel there belongs to the soul, insofar as it is mixed with the body. One thing pleases the sense, another pleases the mind through the sense. The same is clearer in hearing. Whatever is sweet to the ear, we like as such, and it captures our sense. But what is signified by that sound reaches the mind alone through the ears. So when we hear these verses, why do the wintry suns haste to their setting, and what delays the lingering nights? We praise the meter in one way and the thought in another. We do not mean the same thing when we say, it is reasonably sounded, and it is reasonably said. So now there are three kinds of things in which this reasonableness appears: in actions ordered towards some end, in speech, and in what delights us. The first warns us not to act thoughtlessly, the second to teach rightly, the third to contemplate happily. The first belongs to morals, the other two to the disciplines we're now discussing. For that rational power in us, by which we make or follow things that are in accord with reason, was naturally bound to the society of those with whom we shared this same reason. Humans could not be firmly bound together unless they could talk and pour out their thoughts and minds to each other with words, as if they were emptying one mind into another. But the voices of the absent couldn't be heard, so reason invented letters, marking every sound of the mouth and tongue and distinguishing them. But this couldn't be done if the countless variety of things had no fixed limits. So the great necessity of counting and numbering became clear. Once these two things, letters and numbers, were discovered, the early stages of grammar and arithmetic were born as a kind of childhood of learning. Reason having completed grammar, was then prompted to look more closely at the very power by which it had built grammar. By defining, dividing, and joining, it had arranged and ordered grammar and defended it from every intrusion of falsehood. How could it move on to construct other disciplines unless it first distinguished, examined, and set in order its own working tools, so to speak, and produced the discipline of disciplines, which we call logic or dialectic? This art teaches how to teach and how to learn. In it, reason shows itself, what it is, what it wants, what it can do. It knows what knowledge is, and it alone truly wants and is able to make others know. But because foolish men often do not follow the pure truth that is proposed to them, because they cling instead to their own senses and habits, it was necessary not only to teach them as far as possible, but also to move them deeply and strongly. And so reason developed another branch of herself, less pure than dialectic, but fuller of charms for the crowd. This is rhetoric, the art of speaking in ways that emotionally move listeners toward the useful and the good. Rhetoric is not as clean as logic. Its lap is stuffed with pleasant things to sprinkle on the people, so that for their own good they will let themselves be led. Up to this point, the reasonable part of language has been developed in the liberal arts. From here, reason wanted to leap straight into the blessed contemplation of divine things. But so that she wouldn't fall from the heights, she looked for steps and began to make a path by order through her own possessions. She desired beauty, the beauty that the mind alone can see without the bodily eyes, but she was held back by the senses. So she turned her gaze for a moment toward the senses themselves, which claim to have truth, and which, with their noisy urgency, call back the mind that is rushing forward. She began with hearing, because the senses insisted that her language was their domain. Having quickly discovered how different sound is from what sound signifies, she understood that nothing belongs to the ear's judgment except sound itself. And she found that there are three kinds of sound: the human voice, the sound of breath blown into instruments, and the sound produced by striking. To the first belong actors, singers, choirs, and all who sing with their own voices. To the second belong flutes and similar instruments. To the third, lyres, harps, cymbals, and every instrument that produces tone by being struck. She saw that this material is cheap and low, unless it is shaped with a definite proportion of time and a moderated variety of high and low tones. Looking back, she recognized here the seeds she had noticed in grammar when she studied syllables, what she had called feet and accents. Because it was easy to notice the short and long syllables scattered through speech, she tried to arrange these feet into certain regular patterns and join them. She followed her natural sense at first, impressing measured beats that she called cuts or members of the verse. And so that the course of a line would not run farther than her judgment could hold, she set a limit where the pattern must return. From that point she named the unit a verse, that which is not moderated by a fixed end but still flows with ordered feet, she called rhythm, in Latin simply number. So poets were born from her. In them she saw not only tones but also words and meanings of great weight. She honored them greatly and granted them the right to use reasonable falsehoods as they wished. And since they sprang from the same first discipline as grammar, she allowed grammarians to be judges over the poets. In this fourth step, whether in rhythm or in musical modulation, she perceived that numbers rule everything and bring it to perfection. She studied these numbers carefully and found them divine and eternal, especially since, with their help, she had woven together all the earlier disciplines. Now she could hardly bear that the clarity and serenity of these intelligible numbers should be stained by the material of bodily sound. Since what the mind sees is always present and immortal, and numbers belong to that realm, while sound, since it is perceived, flows away into the past, and is impressed on the memory, reason, which now favored poets with a rational and noble myth, asked herself whether there was something in memory like numbers, and she invented the beautiful story that the Muses are the daughters of Jupiter and memory, and so music, sharing in both sense and intellect, was born as the name for this discipline. From here, reason moved on to the treasures of sight and surveyed earth and sky. She sensed that nothing pleased her there except beauty, and in beauty, figure, and in figure, measurable dimensions, and in measurable dimensions, numbers. She asked herself whether that line or circle or any shape she saw there was the same as the one her mind held within. She found that the visible one was far worse, and in no way comparable to what the mind sees. She gathered and ordered these things, and thus geometry was born. The motion of the heavens strongly attracted her attention and invited her to careful study. Even there, in the constant cycles of time, in the fixed paths of the stars, and in the measured spaces between them, she understood that nothing rules except number and measure. By making clear distinctions and arranging all this into order, she created astronomy, a great proof of religion for the devout and a torment for the curious. In all these disciplines, she met with things arranged by number. She recognized, however, that the numbers in the mind themselves, simple and intelligible, were much more beautiful and true. She began to feel herself equal to the task of proving the soul immortal. She carefully examined everything and realized that whatever she was able to do, she did by number. She was struck by a kind of wonder, and began to suspect that perhaps she herself was that very number by which all things are counted, or if not that, then at least that number existed above her, and that she must pursue it. And she grasped that number with all her strength, the one that would show her all truth, the one Proteus-like thing Alypius had mentioned when we were debating the academics, for false images of things we count flow out from that hidden number by which we count. These images drag our thought toward themselves, and often cause that number to slip away, even when it was already in our grasp. If someone doesn't give up in this struggle, but draws everything that is scattered across all these arts back to one simple, certain truth, then he is worthy of the name learned. He will not now seek divine things carelessly, nor will he rest content with mere belief. He will be ready to contemplate, understand, and hold them. But whoever still serves his desires and longs for perishable things, or whoever has begun to flee such things and live purely but doesn't know what nothing is, what unformed matter is, what formed lifeless matter is, what body is, and what the form in body is, what place is, what time is, what it is to be in place, what it is to be in time, what motion in place is, what motion not in place is, what stable motion is, what an age is, what it is to be neither in place nor nowhere, what it is to be outside time and always, what it is to be nowhere and yet not nowhere, to never be and yet never not be. Whoever ignores these things and still wants to talk or argue about the soul, or worse still about the highest God, who is better known by not knowing, he will make as great an error as it is possible to make. It will be easier for the one who has grasped the simple, intelligible numbers to know these things, and that person will be one who is gifted, has the leisure of age or fortune, burns with desire for learning, and has followed the order of the disciplines we described, enough to satisfy reason. For all these liberal arts are partly for life's practical use, partly for the knowledge and contemplation of reality. To gain full mastery of their use is very difficult unless someone from childhood has been extremely gifted, absolutely relentless, and constant in his effort. But what we need from these arts for our purpose will be chosen from all of them. A very small number of things, but very powerful in force. Many will find them hard to grasp. But to you, Mother, whose mind surprises me more each day, and whose soul, either by age or by an admirable self-control, is far from all frivolities and rising from the heavy weight of the body, these things will be as easy as they are difficult for the slowest and most wretched livers. If I said you would easily reach the sort of speech that is completely free from linguistic faults, I would be lying. Even I, who had great need to learn such things, am still criticized by Italians for many of my pronunciations, and I criticize them in turn. It's one thing to be secure by art, another to be secure by birth. As for those grammatical mistakes we call solecisms, a clever critic could probably find some in my speech too. I've even been persuaded that Cicero himself, in all his genius, fell into such faults. As for what people now call barbarisms, the kind of speech that supposedly saved Rome is itself called barbarous in our time. So ignore these childish or irrelevant things. You know grammar so well that you seem to have taken its soul and left its body. I'd say the same about the other arts. If you despise them all completely, then I, as your son, and as far as you allow, urge you to hold fast the faith you received in those venerable mysteries, to keep it firm and cautious. Then remain steady and watchful in your way of life and morals. As for the most obscure and yet divine questions, like how God can do no evil and yet be almighty, while so many evils exist, why he made the world when he had no need of it, whether evil has always existed or began at some time, and if it has always existed, whether it existed under God's rule, and if so, whether this world has always existed in which evil is ruled by his order, and if this world began in time, how evil was held under God's power before the world existed, and why a world was needed at all if the purpose was to imprison evil for the punishment of souls, when evil was already restrained by God's power, and if there was a time when there was no evil under God's rule, what suddenly happened that had not happened in the eternal ages before? For it is absurd to say that some new plan arose in God. If people say that evil was importunate and impudent, and God had to make the world to contain it, any educated person will either laugh or be angry. What could that evil nature do to God? If they say it could do nothing, then there was no reason to make the world. If they say it could harm God, it is intolerable to believe that God is vulnerable, and that he did not use his power wisely to protect his own substance. For these people admit that the soul is punished here, and they deny any difference between the substance of the soul and the substance of God. If, on the other hand, we say this world was not made, it is impious and ungrateful to say that, and to end up saying that God did not make it. So on such matters, people should either follow that order of learning, which I've sketched out, or not probe at all. To put it more briefly and clearly, I say that no one should try to reach knowledge of these things without that double training, good disputation and the power of numbers. If someone thinks that's too much, let him at least know numbers perfectly or logic alone. If that too seems too large, let him at least know thoroughly what one is in number and how powerful it is, not yet in the highest law and highest order of all things, but in the things we feel and do every day. This training will then be taken up by philosophy itself. It will find nothing more to add about the One, but it will grasp the One much more deeply and divinely. Philosophy has two main questions, one about the soul, one about God. The first helps us know ourselves, the second our origin. The first is sweet, the second precious. The first makes us worthy of blessed life, the second makes us blessed. The first question is for students, the second for those already learned. This is the order of studies in wisdom. Through this order, a person becomes suited to understand the order of things, that is, to distinguish the two worlds and the Father of the universe. About him, our only knowledge is that we know how we do not know him. So, following this order, the soul entrusted to philosophy first looks at itself. This is the soul that has been convinced by its training that either it is itself reason, or at least that there is nothing more powerful than numbers in reason, or even that reason is nothing other than number. It says to itself something like this: by some inner hidden movement I can distinguish and connect what must be learned. This power of mine is called reason. What do I distinguish except what either is thought to be one when it is not, or is not as one as it is thought to be? And why do I connect except to make some one thing, as far as possible? So in both distinguishing and connecting, I want one. When I distinguish, I want what is purified. When I connect, what is whole. In one case, I avoid what is alien. In the other, I gather what is my own, so that a completed unity is formed. A stone is a stone only because all its parts and its whole nature are bound in one. What is a tree, if not some unity? If the members and organs of a living body lose unity, the animal is gone. Friends strive for nothing else than to be one. The more one they become, the more they are truly friends. A people is one city, and division is dangerous to it. To disagree is nothing other than to refuse to be one. An army is one out of many soldiers. Every crowd is less easily conquered the more it unites into one. That gathering into one is even called a wedge, as if from coning together. What is love? Does it not want to become one with what it loves? And when it reaches that, doesn't it become one with it? Even bodily pleasure delights so strongly largely because loving bodies are drawn into one. Where does pain become destructive? When it tries to pull apart what was one. From many scattered things placed together, I make one house. I am better than the house, because I make it and it is made. So I am better than the house. But that doesn't make me better than the swallow or the bee, since those creatures also build nests and hives. I am better because I am a rational animal. Is it not true that rationed measure is found in what they build too? Indeed, their works are very full of number and measure. So it is not by making measured things that I am better, but by knowing the measures. Could those creatures build such measured structures without knowing? They could. How do we know this? From the fact that we too move our tongues and lips with measured patterns to produce letters and words, yet we don't think through the precise motions as we speak. And what good singer, even if he doesn't know music as a science, doesn't hold rhythm and melody in his memory? What could be more full of number than that? Nature is at work here. Whoever does this without understanding is still a kind of beast, even if his work is beautiful. When does he rise above the beasts and deserve to be set over the cattle, when he knows what he is doing? So, what makes me better than the animals is not that I produce measured things, but that I know the measures. Then the soul says, how can reason be immortal if I, who am said to be rational and mortal, am one thing, while reason is another? Or is reason not immortal, yet the ratio of 1 to 2 or 2 to 4 is true and always true? It was not more true yesterday than today, nor will it be more true tomorrow than the day after. Nor will it cease to be true even if the whole visible world collapses. The world changes constantly, reason does not. So, if reason is immortal, and I am that by which I distinguish and connect all things, it is reason by which I do this, then either the part by which I am called mortal is not truly mine, or else my soul is not reason but uses reason, and thus must flee from the lower part to the higher, from mortal to immortal. In this and many other reflections, a well-trained soul talks with itself. I won't follow out all the steps now, so as not to lose order by losing measure. Step by step, the soul leads itself not only by faith, but by clear reason into the best life. For a person who has seen the power of numbers will think it unworthy and pitiable to have learned to make a verse run well, and a lyre play in tune, and yet to let his own life and soul wander and go astray, clashing horribly under the rule of desire. But when the soul has arranged and ordered itself and made itself harmonious and beautiful, it will dare to look upon God Himself and the fountain from which all truth flows, the Father of truth. O great God, what eyes will those be that see you? How healthy, how beautiful, how strong, how steady, how clear, how blessed. And what will they see? What, I ask? What can we think? What can we imagine? What can we say? Our everyday words are worn out by vile use. I will only say this. A vision of such beauty is promised to us that by its imitation all other beauties are beautiful, and compared to it all else is ugly. Whoever sees this beauty, and the one who lives well, prays well, and studies well will see it, will no longer be disturbed by questions like why one man longs for children and has none, while another throws his away, why one hates his unborn children, and another loves those already born. How could he deny that there is nothing that will not be present with God, from whom everything must be made in order, and yet still believe that prayers are useless? Finally, when will any burdens or dangers or annoyances or blandishments of fortune disturb the righteous man? In this visible world we must give much thought to time and place. What pleases us in one part of space or of time should be understood as far inferior to the whole of which it is a part, and what offends us in a part should be seen by the learned person to offend only because the whole is not visible, because that part fits the whole in a wonderful way that we do not yet see. In that invisible world, however, every part is perfect and beautiful in itself, like a whole. We'll talk about these things at greater length if your desire and God's help stays on the straight course we've laid out, or some shorter and easier one if we find it, and if you hold it firmly and steadily. For us to do this, we must work above all on good morals, otherwise our God will not listen to us. But those who live well he will gladly hear. Let us pray then not for riches or honors or any such things, things that are slippery and restless and can be stopped by any obstacle. But let us pray that the things may come that make us good and truly blessed. Mother, we especially entrust this task to you, that you should pray most devoutly for these things. I firmly believe that by your prayers God has already given me this desire, to prefer nothing at all to the discovery of truth, to want nothing else, to think of nothing else, to love nothing else, and I still do not stop believing that this supreme good, which we have begun to long for at your prompting, we shall obtain through your petitions as well. And you, Alypius, how can I exhort or admonish you? You are already so eager that no exhortation is too much, for love of such things, however great, can never be too much. Here Alypius said, "You've really made us believe what sometimes seemed incredible, that the memory of the wisest and greatest men, which once seemed unbelievable, can now be affirmed and even sworn to. For what have you done today except open before our very eyes that venerable and almost divine discipline of Pythagoras, whose teaching we once admired from a distance? You've shown both the rules of life and the vast fields and open seas of knowledge, and what that man especially revered, the very shrines of truth, where they are, what they are like, and how they should be sought. You've done this briefly yet fully enough that, even though we suspect and believe that you still know things even more hidden, we would be shameless if we asked you for more." "I gladly accept your words," I said. "What delights and stirs me is not your praise, which is not fully true, but the true desire in your heart. It's good that we plan to send this to our friend who delights in telling stories about us, true or false. If anyone else reads it, I don't fear that he will be angry at you. Who will not pardon a lover's mistake in judging his friend? As for your mention of Pythagoras, I believe it came to your mind by some divine and hidden order. Something very important had slipped my mind, something about him that I often admire and even praise daily when we speak together. According to Varro, a man no one would doubt, he used to give his students the training to govern a state only at the very end, when they were already learned, perfected, wise, and blessed. He saw such storms in public affairs that he would commit them only to a man who could guide the ship of state almost divinely among the rocks, and who, if all else failed, could himself become a rock against the waves. Only of the wise man can that line truly be said, "He stands like a cliff in the sea, unmoved by the raging waves," and all the rest of that noble passage. With these words our discussion ended. We were all joyful and full of hope, and when evening had come and the lamps were brought in, we broke up our session. Thank you for listening to this translation of Augustine's On Order, Book 2, presented by Augustinus Vox. To experience this work reimagined as a 1980s rock ballad, please be sure to check out the corresponding album by Augustinus Vox, also entitled On Order. Augustinus Vox is a restless heart project that reimagines Augustine's writings and the voices of antiquity through the power of 1980s rock, bringing ancient wisdom to modern ears through music, translations, and creative exploration. To learn more, please visit augustinusvox.com